Depending on your source, America has either obliterated Iran's nuclear program or just set it back a few weeks. What are you to think when you see these sort of news stories? Let's talk about it. Step into my editorial meeting. I'm Jenna, and this is Smarter News. Well, hi, everybody. I didn't expect to jump on today, but I got a really interesting question from a member of my team on how we were going to approach a top story of the day. And it was her suggestion that got me in front of the microphone and in front of you to talk a little bit more about our editorial decisions regarding some of the stories that we have in front of us today. So let me just give you a little bit of a background to this. One of the things I talk about on Smarter News is we want to be solid, quick, concise, nonpartisan news in a day and age when most of the news is really junk food for the mind. That's a term I've used over the last couple of years. It's just filled with junk food for the mind, meaning that there's a lot of tasty things out there that people want a little bit of a part of, but it's very low on substance. And we could talk more about this in the future. Part of the reason for all the junk food in front of us, all the clutter, is that the business model of news is really built upon that. So the more content, even when it's not very substantial or nutritious for you, is still going to be put in front of you. And because often it's the sweetest, easiest things to access, this is what seems to just absorb the news space. And that's what we want to do at Smarter News, is be an antidote to that. We want to make sure you can come to us for just the best stuff and then get on with your day, because I actually don't want you to be stuck in a 24-hour news cycle. I want you to be totally dedicated to living your best story, whatever that is. And so when we see stories like this that I'm about to describe to you, I think of them like cotton candy stories, as we're going to extend the food metaphor. Anyone getting hungry? It's almost lunchtime here in the Central Time in Texas. So it's a cotton candy story. Again, bright, very intriguing. Who doesn't want to dabble a little bit in that? But mostly full of air. And it can be difficult when you have these stories in front of you to understand, well, how much of our time at Smarter News do we want to dedicate to them? And how much are they worthwhile to put in front of you? This story, though, is an international story. And because of that, I do think we need to recognize it and talk through it a little bit, because there are some angles here that are substantial to this story. There's also parts to this story that feel a little bit like junk food for the mind for the amount of attention that it's receiving in the press today. So here's the story. Over the last 24 hours or so, there's been a variety of different reports. CNN had one of the first ones, CBS, Washington Post, NPR, a lot of the media outlets now have this report. And what it's citing is several intelligence officials, or those with knowledge of an intelligence report, that are suggesting that the early assessment of America's recent attack on Iran nuclear sites is that we didn't really cause that much damage, that maybe at best we set back the program a few weeks. And so this is casting a lot of doubt on the president's public statements and the statements of others that we have destroyed Iran's nuclear program. Now, these sources are not on the record. And my team knows that I don't like putting stories based on unnamed sources in front of you, because there's no way for us to vet these sources unless we talk to them ourselves. And clearly these sources are talking to a lot of people right now. And it appears that they're all the same sources giving the same information to different news outlets, but there's no way really to know. However, the White House ferociously responded to these reports and continues to do so. In fact, I have some brand new sound just from today where the president is even responding and others are responding to this different assessment that now has received international attention. So we have a story based on unnamed sources, anonymous sources, but several sources that are suggesting that the White House's image that they're portraying about these attacks is just not accurate. So a few things just to think about here before I launch into some of the sound that I want to play for you. First of all, one of the things I'm noticing from this reporting, whether it's from the White House or these anonymous sources or any media outlets that are taking a look on all sides, is an understanding about why this even matters. Why does this new report based on anonymous sources even matter? And it's because it's what's at stake. When we're looking at this story about America's attack on Iran nuclear sites, The reason why this story matters is about your safety and security. The president is painting a picture that you are safer today than you were last week. And what this report is suggesting is maybe that's not necessarily the case. And listen, we have some past precedent for that. We can maybe bring up an image of President Bush standing in front of a mission accomplished sign early on in the war with Iraq and think about that image and how the president was talking about how successful it was and realizing, wait a minute, we have years and years and years of war after that and lots of questions about the intelligence that led to that war in the first place. So there's past precedent to question those in leadership in America about our different military operations. And in fact, it's very American as well to just question our leaders in general, no matter what political party or what particular time in history. So there's a little bit of that angst of, is what we're being told actually accurate? And at this point, we really don't have solid information. We don't have an official report from the US government. We also just have how the White House is describing it. And we don't have anyone on the ground that we can even describe as neutral to just look at these sites, even just with their own eyes, and tell us what it even looks like. As we heard from Holly McKay, a war correspondent and writer who we just talked to yesterday about her time in Iran, some of these areas are extremely rural. So not only do we not have diplomatic relations with Iran, we don't have a ton of, free independent press roaming around the country taking a look at this. And we quite frankly don't really know what our resources are in the intelligence community on the ground to get an accurate description. We're not really hearing that much from the Iranians. However, the White House did put out, in light of these reports, a huge sheet that is quoting all sorts of different people around the world, including an Iranian official, that says that is describing this attack as very, very destructive. And so I'll put that in show notes so you can see it. But we have two drastically very different pictures. What's at stake, though, and why this story matters is all the same. It's this question: are we more safe or less safe than last week at this time? And most complicated stories or different stories at different times always come back to the most simple question. And that's really what's at the heart of this story. The second thing that's missing from some of this reporting is a little bit of context here. So, according to these sources, they are attached or are seeing a report from the Defense Intelligence Agency. Here's something that's really important to know: America has 18 different intel agencies. 18. According to these reports, this one assessment is from one of those. Now, some of these different agencies have different reputations. So the Defense Intelligence Agency is underneath the Pentagon. So this is our, war fighting military agency. And so hearing from sources within the Defense Intelligence Agency is different than, let's say, hearing from an intel source for the Coast Guard or even the FBI, because all of these different intel agencies sometimes are under different departments and others are operating more independently, like the CIA, for example. But that matters. And I think just understanding, wow, we have 18 different intelligence agencies and sometimes they have different assessments is really critical to know for this story, because so far, the only assessment that's being quoted here, according to these sources, is from the DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency. It's not from the CIA. It's not from other sources as of yet, but that's something we're going to be watching for. So let's talk a little bit about why this is a difficult story to approach. So I have a bunch of anonymous sources on the record to different media outlets. Then I have the White House on the record directly. And while I can quote the White House directly to a named source, I don't have a way to directly quote these unnamed sources. But I want to cover this story in front of you. So how do I do it in an equal way? It can actually be very difficult because I have a whole bunch of sound and text from a variety of different officials in the US government and some quotes from anonymous sources. So immediately this starts looking imbalanced. And what happens in the news is that the press, let's just take this from the belief that everybody's trying to do the best that they can and not trying to be biased or partisan. Let's just take it from there. The press, in the effort to report this out and to be able to give equal weight, if I'm trying to give equal weight to both sides, and I have a ton of sound and information coming on the record from the White House, then in order to give equal time to these anonymous sources, I have to start explaining what they're saying. And then I almost can appear like I'm defending them or fighting on their behalf because I don't have a person, I don't have a name, I don't have sound, I don't have anything. I just have some of these quotes attributed to a stranger. And that stranger, that source is really important. So if we have the president, who I'm going to play sound from on the record, that is that I can say this is the president of the United States. What if this anonymous source is a lower level intel official? What happens if this is a 40-year veteran of the intel community? Those are completely different sources. I can't even give you that information. And it's really important to know that. It's one of the reasons why anonymous sources are very difficult to quote, and I don't like working with them. They can give you good tips, they can give you good lead, but until you have something on the record, we immediately have an imbalance in the news. And I want to be 100% certain about what I'm putting in front of you. So you can see just off the bat, this news coverage is going to look a little bit imbalanced. And I want to make sure that we're providing the most balance to you. So it's just something to keep in mind as you see this story. What did the president say about what he believes about these attacks? Here he is speaking at the NATO summit earlier today. Let's go ahead and take a listen.
Total obliteration. I believe they didn't have a chance to get anything out because we acted fast. If it would have taken 2 weeks, maybe, but it's very hard to remove that kind of material.
Let's listen one more time.
I believe it was total obliteration. I believe they didn't have a chance to get anything out because we acted fast. If it would have taken 2 weeks, maybe, but it's very hard to remove that kind of material.
So did you notice what the president said? He said, I believe that's something to pay attention to. I believe this. Now, he may be saying that because of information he's getting from his different cabinet officials who we're going to hear from in just a moment. But it is different than saying we believe or our sources, our intel community, the United States of America believes, based on the information that we have, that this is what happened. So the I believe is a little bit of a caveat, so pay attention to that. The Secretary of Defense was sitting off camera, sort of nearby, and he's going to jump into this as well. I want you to listen to what he had to say because this is extremely critical.
The 30,000 pounds of explosives and capability of those munitions, it was devastation underneath Fordo. And the amount of munitions, 6 per location, any assessment that tells you it was something otherwise is speculating with other motives. And we know that because when you actually look at the report, by the way, it was a top secret report, it was preliminary, it was low confidence. All right, so this isn't, you make assessments based on what you know.
They don't. It said it could be very devastating, very serious.
Moderate to severe, and we believe far more likely severe and obliterated. So this is a political motive here.
Okay, so he's saying this is a politically motivated attack. However, did you notice he also confirmed that the report exists? And in fact, that's something that the White House has not suggested. They have not suggested that this is not a real report that was issued by the Defense Intelligence Agency. They're not suggesting it was made up. What they are saying here, and what we just heard from the Secretary of Defense, is that no, this is a real report. It was top secret. This is actually a pretty big leak of top secret information, but it's initial, and there's a range of a different way to read it. So there's a range of possibilities. It's not fully official because it's still a question of gathering information. It's preliminary in many ways, but it does exist. So that's important. The White House is not denying that these anonymous sources are just making things up. They are saying, though, that these sources are politically motivated and for some reason, as you heard from Secretary Hegseth, maybe politically, just want to cast doubt on the administration's decision to strike. Here is Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who is also sitting with the president. Let's take a listen to what he has to say on this.
Are professional stabbers. That's what they are. They go out and they read this stuff and then they tell you what it says against the law, but they characterize it for you in a way that's absolutely false. There's no way Iran comes to the table if somehow nothing had happened. This was complete and total obliteration. They're in bad shape. They are way behind today compared to where they were just 7 days ago because of what the president did.
So strong words there from the Secretary of State. Now, already I have 3 sound bites from members of the administration. I don't have the same from these anonymous sources. I am going to read to you a little bit from CNN and the way that CNN was reporting this out. The U.S. military strikes on 3 of Iran's nuclear facilities last weekend did not destroy the core components of the country's nuclear program and likely only set it back by months, according to an early U.S. intelligence assessment that was described by 7 people briefed on it. I have to go down to the 4th paragraph where it's quoting 2 of the people familiar with the assessment that said Iran's stockpile of enriched uranium was not destroyed. One of the people said the centrifuges, a key part of a nuclear weapon, are largely, quote, intact. And then I have to go down further to get another quote by an anonymous source that says, so the assessment is that the US set them back maybe a few months tops. That's all I can do is kind of present this in front of you. You have 2 different points of view on this. And really the question is that I arrive at is the question that we started with, which is, this is a little bit like ring around the rosy, right? The White House is saying this, the anonymous sources are going to continue to talk to the media is going to continue to ask the White House about it, the White House is going to continue to deny it. Here we go, round and around and around and around. But are we missing the point? Are we missing the point? Who is asking the question, are we safer? Are our kids safer because of what happened with America attacking Iran's nuclear site? Like, that is at the heart of this. And maybe the answer to that is we don't know yet. Did we create a safer world or a less safe world based on these actions? And we can't tell the future, but we have to go back to what really matters to all of us. Also, when the press doesn't come back to the core question, then this plays right into the perception of the press as being politicized. Because instead of focusing on what really matters to all Americans, the press appears more and more combative with what the White House is saying. The Secretary General of NATO actually jumped in here. His name is Mark Rutte. And at times he's been sort of criticized or sometimes even ribbed a little bit about being a little too friendly to President Trump, not having an adversarial relationship as some have in the past. But he offered this perspective, and I thought it was important, and it's going to bring us to the end of our report here. So take a listen to what he had to say.
Can I just alert you to one other aspect? So the great thing is you took out the nuclear capability of Iran. This was crucial. You did it in a way which is extremely impressive. But the signal sends to the rest of the world that this president, when it comes to it, yes, he is a man of peace, but if necessary, he is willing to use strength, the enormous strength of the American military. So I think that signal to the rest of the world, this is far beyond Iran, is extremely important. So let me also point us to that aspect of what happens.
That's a really interesting perspective because he's saying, hey, the details here are important, but also the message may be more important. So here are 3 questions I think we should be asking in light of the events over the last several days that maybe will bring us back to a more substantial news reporting or news coverage on the historic events that we witnessed together. Let's pick up off of what Mark Rutte just said there. How did the president's actions change the way that the world views us? How does it affect America's ability to lead? The fact that he used force, how does that change the perception of America and what America means to the world and what the world hears when we speak? So how did the president's actions change the way, potentially, that America can and will lead moving ahead? Number 2, picking up and building on that, what did these actions mean to our adversaries? Iran is one adversary, but China, Russia, North Korea, all of which have nuclear weapons. What is the message that was received by them? Everyone has a different perception. You could have a bunch of people in the room hear one thing, but what they take away is something different. So what did each country take away from this? And how is that changing their behavior or their political or foreign policy decisions? And number 3, we're so focused on Iran's nuclear footprint, but what I'm most curious about is their terror footprint. How did this attack impact Iran's ability to support and resource terrorist groups around the world? Because the question about are we safe is not just about whether or not we're safe from a world war. It's also whether or not we're more or less safe from terrorist groups that can cause us all harm, whether abroad or at home. And Iran, as we know, is a state sponsor of terrorism as designated by the US government. It has been since 1984. So how did the actions of the last week impact Iran's ability to fund and support terrorist groups? And what is the impact of that? These are some questions I think we can be asking. I think we have to acknowledge this report. And one of the things that I'll be watching for is, does this intel report gather more momentum? Meaning, do we hear today that this is from the Defense Intelligence Agency, but we hear tomorrow that the CIA believes the same thing and the FBI also believes it? And there's suddenly this swell of momentum to suggest that, hey, America, you didn't do that good of a job. And by the way, they're continuing to construct a nuclear weapon nearby and they're close to it now and they're really angry. Do we see more agencies? Do we see more sources? Do we see a source that actually gets on the record, goes on some big evening show and sacrifices their job because they believe this is important for the American people to know? That's what we're going to be watching for. The opposite could happen, though, that this report sort of flares out because there's not enough sources to keep it going and no one's willing to go on the record. There's some reporting, and we heard from the president overseas again today at NATO, that potentially there could be a meeting with the Iranians next week. What does an agreement look like in this day and age? And what do the next several days even look like? There's a lot of unknown, both about what just happened and what's going to happen in the future. But some of these big questions that I just mentioned are questions that we really can ask at any time that give us a little bit more depth. I don't mind a little junk food. Believe me, I like to skim the tabloids. I'm going to look at a report like this, but I always want to bring you back to what's most substantial and what most matters in your life. If I have you for a short period of time, I don't want to waste your time. It's one of the things that we all share. It's our most valuable resource is our time. So I hope spending a little time together looking through this story was helpful to you and also gives you some perspective on one of the biggest news stories of the day that we, in fact, cannot source on the record. So I look forward to your thoughts, your questions, your comments. You can always email me, send a voice note, hello@smarternews.com. I love hearing from you. And let me know if you like being part of this editorial meeting. Maybe we can do some more of these to talk through the stories, not just report them, but talk through them. What to consider, what should we be thinking about? What are some of the limitations to our reporting? And how can we all do better? Have a great day wherever you all are. Have a great day wherever you are. And I'll be back with more on smarternews.com. Bye, guys.